6 years together. I was scrolling through old photos on my phone and stopped at one from before we met. There I was at a friend's birthday party, head thrown back mid-laugh, wearing this bright yellow dress I'd completely forgotten I owned. My arms were spread wide in some exaggerated gesture, taking up space, commanding attention, fully present and alive in that moment. I stared at that photo for a long time because I couldn't remember the last time I'd laughed like that. Couldn't remember the last time I'd worn something that bright or made gestures that big or taken up that much space in a room. That girl in the photo had opinions about everything. She'd debate politics at dinner parties, argue passionately about movies and books, take strong stances on topics that mattered to her. She was loud, sometimes too loud, unapologetic about her presence. She'd walk into rooms with confidence, speak her mind without filtering every word first, exist without constantly calculating how much space she was allowed to occupy. I looked at that version of myself and felt like I was looking at a stranger, someone I used to know but had lost contact with somewhere along the way. I couldn't pinpoint exactly when the change happened. There wasn't a specific moment when I decided to become someone else, no conscious choice to shrink myself down. It was gradual, imperceptible, like aging or a season shifting. You don't notice it day by day, but then you look back and everything is different. I'd thought I was just maturing, growing up, learning to compromise and adapt the way adults in relationships are supposed to. I'd told myself that's what love looked like, adjusting yourself to fit with another person, softening your edges, becoming more agreeable. But somewhere in all that adjusting and softening and becoming agreeable, I disappeared. Not all at once, but piece by piece, small concessions that added up over time until the person I saw in the mirror bore little resemblance to the person I used to be. And the terrifying part was that I hadn't even noticed it happening. I'd been so focused on making the relationship work, on being a good partner, on not rocking the boat, that I'd failed to see I was drowning myself in the process. The transformation started with small things that seemed insignificant at the time. I stopped sharing my excitement about things because his responses would kill it instantly. I'd come home energized about a new project at work or a book I was reading or an idea I'd had, and I'd start telling him about it with genuine enthusiasm. His reactions were always lukewarm at best, "That's nice," delivered in a tone that suggested it wasn't nice at all, or a distracted hum that meant he wasn't really listening. After enough of these deflating interactions, I learned to keep my excitement to myself. Then I stopped sharing my problems because when I did, he'd immediately offer solutions instead of just listening. I didn't want solutions to every problem. Sometimes I just needed to process out loud, to feel heard, to have someone acknowledge that something was hard without immediately trying to fix it. But he'd get frustrated when I didn't implement his advice, like sharing my feelings was pointless if I wasn't going to act on his recommendations. So I stopped, kept my struggles to myself, handled my stress alone, learned that emotional support wasn't something our relationship offered. Eventually, I stopped sharing it all. Not just excitement or problems, but thoughts, observations, random things that crossed my mind throughout the day. What was the point when every attempt at connection fell flat, when my words seemed to bounce off him without leaving any impact? Our conversations became transactional, logistical. What time will you be home? Did you pay that bill? What should we have for dinner? The deeper sharing, the real connection, the vulnerability that makes intimacy possible, all of that just stopped because it had nowhere to go. My friends started commenting that I'd gotten quiet. We'd be out at group dinners, and I'd realize I'd barely spoken all evening, just sat there nodding along while everyone else talked and laughed and engaged. Sarah pulled me aside once and asked if something was wrong, said I seemed different, less like myself. I brushed it off, said I was just tired. My mom asked the same thing during a phone call. "You sound distant, honey. Are you okay?" I gave her the same answer. I was fine, just tired. The truth was I didn't know how to be myself anymore. I'd learned to read his moods with the precision of a meteorologist predicting weather patterns, and I adjusted my entire existence accordingly. Bad day at work? I made myself scarce, stayed quiet, didn't burden him with conversation or needs or my presence. Good day? Maybe I could exist a little bit more, speak a little louder, take up a little more space. My volume, my visibility, my right to exist in my own home, all of it calibrated to his emotional state on any given day. I stopped wearing certain clothes because he'd made passing comments. That skirt was too short, that top was too low cut, that dress was trying too hard. He'd say them casually, not as demands, but as observations, and I'd internalize them as rules. My wardrobe gradually shifted toward neutral colors, modest cuts, nothing that drew attention or expressed personality. I boxed up the yellow dress from that photo along with everything else bright and bold, telling myself I was just growing up, dressing more appropriately, when really I was erasing visible evidence of who I used to be. I stopped seeing certain friends because he found them annoying or dramatic or too loud. Not all at once, just gradual decline in how often I saw them, excuses for why I couldn't make it to brunches or girls' nights. Eventually, they stopped inviting me, and I told myself it was natural drift, that friendships fade as you get older. But the truth was I'd chosen him over them repeatedly until there was nothing left to choose from. My social circle shrank to just his friends, his coworkers, people whose company I tolerated, but who didn't really know me. I stopped having hobbies that were mine alone. I used to paint, used to take photography walks on weekends, used to be in a book club where we'd discuss literature and ideas. But our free time revolved around what he wanted to do, watching sports, playing video games, hanging out with his friends. When I suggested doing my own activities, there was always this subtle pressure, this unspoken expectation that I should be available if you wanted to do something. So I let my hobbies fall away one by one, convinced myself I didn't have time or energy, when really I'd just learned that my interests didn't matter in the hierarchy of our shared life. I became a supporting character in my own life, someone who existed to facilitate his comfort and convenience. My role was to be pleasant but not too demanding, present but not too visible, helpful but not too needy. I organized my days around his schedule, my moods around his emotional state, my entire existence around making his life easier. And he was completely fine with that arrangement. Never questioned it, never asked where the old me had gone, never seemed to notice that I'd fundamentally changed. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of the person I used to be and feel this sharp ache of loss. I'd hear a song that used to make me dance around my apartment and feel nothing. I'd pass by an art supply store and think about going in, then keep walking. I'd see friends posting about activities I used to love and feel disconnected from that version of myself, like she was someone I'd known in another life. The ache would pass quickly, pushed down by the daily routine of existing in diminished form. I wondered if maybe he preferred this version of me quieter, less demanding, always available, no strong opinions to navigate, no separate interests to accommodate. This version was easier to be with, required less effort, made fewer waves. The thought would surface and I'd push it away because acknowledging it meant acknowledging something deeply wrong, something I wasn't ready to name. So I'd tell myself I was overthinking, being dramatic, creating problems where there weren't any. There were moments of rebellion, small flickers of the old me trying to resurface. I'd buy something colorful, speak up with an opinion, suggest doing something I wanted to do. But the friction it created, the subtle disapproval in his expression, the way he'd disengage or dismiss, it was easier to just go back to being small and quiet. Each attempt to reclaim pieces of myself felt like swimming upstream, exhausting and ultimately futile when the current of his preferences was so much stronger. I started wondering if this was just what love required. Every article about relationships talked about compromise and sacrifice, about growing together and adjusting to each other. Maybe this was normal. Maybe everyone went through this process of sanding down their edges to fit with someone else. Maybe the problem was that I was holding on to some naive idea of maintaining my individuality when the mature thing was to blend, to merge, to become a unit instead of two separate people. I was cleaning out my closet one Saturday, finally tackling the boxes I'd been avoiding for years, when I found my old journal from before we met. Leather-bound, pages filled with my handwriting from 5, 6, 7 years ago. I sat down on the floor right there and started reading. Entry after entry about my dreams, traveling to Italy to study art, opening my own photography studio, learning to speak Spanish, teaching art classes to kids. My passions poured out on every page, descriptions of paintings I wanted to create, ideas for projects, excitement about exhibitions I'd seen. There was this fire in those entries, this electric sense of purpose and possibility. That girl had so much she wanted to do, so much she cared about, so much energy and enthusiasm for life. And reading those words, I cried. Actually sat there on my closet floor and cried because I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt passionate about anything. Couldn't remember the last time I'd had a dream that felt urgent and real and necessary. Somewhere in the past 6 years, that fire had gone out completely, and I'd barely noticed it happening. He hadn't taken these things from me directly. There was no moment where he demanded I stop painting or told me to give up my dreams or ordered me to shrink myself. It had all been subtler than that, subtle enough that I could pretend it wasn't happening, that I was choosing these changes freely. But sitting there with my journal in my hands, I understood what had really occurred. I'd given myself away piece by piece, thinking that's what love required. That sacrifice meant making myself smaller, quieter, less. I'd confused accommodation with love, self-erasure with partnership. I'd thought that becoming less threatening, less vibrant, less present was the path to harmony, when really it was just the path to disappearing. And he'd never asked me to come back. Never noticed I was gone. Never wondered where the passionate, opinionated, creative person he'd met had disappeared to. Maybe because this version was easier to live with. Maybe because he'd never really wanted all of me in the first place. I couldn't keep living as a ghost in my own life. Couldn't keep being a supporting character, couldn't keep smothering every spark of who I was to keep someone comfortable who'd never once asked if I was okay losing myself. That girl in the yellow dress, the one with dreams and fire and opinions and presence, she was still in there somewhere, buried under years of making myself small. And maybe it was time to remember what it felt like to take up space again, to laugh loudly, to wear bright colors, to exist without apology. If you've looked at old photos or journals and barely recognized the person you used to be, you're not wrong for grieving what you gave away. Many in the comments have shared their own moments of finding evidence of who they were before they shrunk themselves. Sometimes seeing it clearly is the first step to coming back. If this resonates, this space continues for those ready to remember what it feels like to take up space again.